to the architect of automatic death. The workshop fell silent, except for the rhythmic hammering of steel on steel. In the dim gaslight of a Crayford factory, Hiram Maxim bent over his newest creation, a water-cooled machine gun that would bear the Vickers name and reshape the very nature of warfare. It was 1912, and the industrial titan behind this mechanical marvel understood something the generals did not. The next war would not be won by courage alone, but by the cold mathematics of sustained firepower. Steam rose from the cooling jacket as Maxim adjusted the final mechanism. His weathered hands, stained with oil and marked by countless hours of precision work, moved with the confidence of a man who had spent 30 years perfecting the marriage of violence and engineering. The distinctive water jacket gleamed under the factory lights, its methodical design promising hours of continuous fire without the jamming that plagued lesser weapons. The crisis had been brewing for decades. European armies still marched in formation, still believed in the romance of cavalry charges and bayonet assaults. But observers returning from colonial conflicts whispered of something darker, automatic weapons that could cut down hundreds in minutes. The British Empire, for all its naval supremacy, faced a troubling reality. Its infantry tactics belonged to the previous century, while its enemies embraced the brutal efficiency of industrial killing. Maxim straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth that had seen too many such moments. The weapon before him represented more than engineering achievement. It embodied the transformation of warfare from an art requiring courage and skill into an industry requiring only mathematics and ammunition. He had given the world something it didn't know it needed, and now that knowledge sat heavy in his chest like undigested food. "Sir Hiram, the demonstration is scheduled for tomorrow morning," said his assistant, a young man whose enthusiasm still burned bright despite months in the factory's perpetual twilight. "Yes," said Maxim quietly. "Tomorrow they'll see what industrial war truly means." The assistant nodded eagerly, but Maxim's expression remained troubled. He had spent years convincing skeptical military minds that automatic weapons represented the future of battlefield dominance. Now, with European tensions reaching a breaking point and the Vickers gun ready for mass production, he found himself wondering if some futures were worth creating. Through the factory windows, London's gaslit streets stretched into darkness. Somewhere beyond those lights, in barracks and war colleges across the continent, officers studied maps and planned campaigns based on tactics that his invention had already rendered obsolete. They would learn, he knew, but the lesson would be written in casualties that would make the colonial conflicts look like training exercises. Hiram Stevens Maxim had arrived in London carrying the weight of rejection. Born to a poor Maine farming family, he'd been ridiculed as a child for his obsession with mechanical contraptions. His father called him a dreamer. His teachers saw only a distracted boy who sketched gears instead of paying attention. But young Hiram possessed something rare, the ability to see solutions where others saw only problems. At 14, he'd built his first automatic mechanism from scrap metal. At 20, he'd invented his first patent. At 40, after the American patent system had crushed several of his innovations, he sailed for England with nothing but blueprints and burning ambition. The meeting that changed history happened at a Viennese exposition in 1881. A stranger, learning of Maxim's engineering background, offered casual advice. "If you want to make money, forget about electric lights. Invent something that will help these Europeans kill each other more efficiently." The words struck Maxim like lightning. He'd spent years perfecting peaceful innovations, better mousetraps, improved light bulbs, only to watch others profit from his ideas. Perhaps it was time to embrace a darker genius. Now, 3 decades later, that casual conversation had produced the most efficient killing machine in human history. The Vickers gun could fire continuously for hours, operated by crews who understood they wielded industrial-scale lethality. Each gun could sustain rates of fire that would have required dozens of riflemen, transforming defensive positions into mathematical equations of death. As Maxim prepared to leave the factory, he caught his reflection in the polished surface of the water jacket. The face, looking back, carried the weight of achievement and the burden of foresight. Tomorrow's demonstration would prove his weapon's reliability to military observers who still believed wars were won by brave men with steady rifles. But Maxim already knew what those observers would learn too late. Bravery remained essential, but it could no longer overcome superior firepower through sheer determination. If stories like this make you question what you'd do in someone else's boots, tell us in the comments how you imagine you'd react in this camp, and stay with us for the next chapters. What happens when a man's greatest achievement becomes his greatest burden? The breakthrough came through obsession. Maxim locked himself in his workshop, studying the recoil physics of firearms with mathematical precision. The problem seemed impossible: how to harness a bullet's explosive force to automatically load, fire, and eject the next round. Military experts insisted it couldn't be done reliably. The mechanisms would jam, overheat, or break under stress. But Maxim saw what they missed. The solution lay not in fighting the weapon's violence, but in channeling it. The winter of 1883 found Maxim in his London workshop, surrounded by failed prototypes and calculations that covered every available surface. Coal smoke from the nearby factories mixed with the acrid smell of gunpowder residue, creating an atmosphere that matched his darkening mood. Sleep became irregular, meals forgotten as the puzzle consumed him entirely. His first prototype nearly killed him. The recoil mechanism malfunctioned, sending the bolt backward with devastating force. But in that moment of failure, Maxim glimpsed the answer. The weapon didn't need to be tamed, it needed to be conducted, like a symphony of destruction. He redesigned the entire system around water cooling and precise timing, creating not just a gun, but an industrial process that happened to fire bullets. "You're playing with forces beyond your understanding," his neighbor, a veteran of the Crimean conflict, warned during one of Maxim's rare ventures outside the workshop. "War isn't about machines, it's about the courage of men." "Courage," said Maxim, pausing at his door, "doesn't stop bullets, but mathematics can multiply them exponentially." The old soldier walked away, shaking his head, but Maxim had already returned to his calculations. The mathematical beauty of automatic fire consumed him, the perfect timing of loading, firing, and ejection that could transform a single operator into the equivalent of an entire rifle company. Each component had to function with clock-like precision, channeling the explosive force that destroyed other designs into the very mechanism that enabled continuous operation. By spring 1884, Maxim had achieved his goal. The demonstration in 1884 shocked even Maxim. His machine gun fired continuously for nearly an hour, consuming ammunition at a rate that left witnesses speechless. The rhythmic chatter echoed across the testing ground like industrial machinery, each round precisely timed and mechanically delivered. Smoke rose from the barrel in steady puffs, while the water cooling system maintained operational temperature through sustained fire that would have melted conventional weapons. But the British War Office remained skeptical. Automatic weapons were unreliable, they argued. Soldiers would waste ammunition. Traditional rifle discipline was superior. They ordered a handful of guns for evaluation purposes, then buried them in armories alongside other innovations deemed too radical for practical warfare. The rejection stung deeper than Maxim expected. He had created something that transcended existing military understanding, yet institutional conservatism treated it as an expensive curiosity. Officers who had never seen sustained automatic fire dismissed its potential based on theories that belonged to an earlier century of warfare. "They don't understand what they're looking at," Maxim confided to his workshop assistant. "They see a complicated rifle when they should see the end of everything they know about fighting." The assistant, young enough to embrace radical ideas, nodded enthusiastically. But surely when they see it work in actual combat... Combat will teach them, said Maxim grimly. The question is how many men will die learning lessons they could absorb in peacetime. Meanwhile, rumors filtered back from colonial campaigns where innovative officers, desperate for advantages against overwhelming numbers, secretly deployed Maxim's weapons. The reports spoke of impossible defensive ratios, single guns holding off charges by hundreds of warriors, mathematical precision replacing the chaos of traditional battle. The real test came during colonial campaigns, where innovative officers desperate for advantages secretly deployed Maxim's weapons. At the Battle of the Shangani River in 1893, a single Maxim gun held off repeated charges by hundreds of Matabele warriors. The results were mathematically horrific and strategically undeniable. Word began filtering back to London. Maxim's invention didn't just work, it dominated. But even as reports confirmed his weapon's devastating effectiveness, Maxim felt no satisfaction. Each success story carried an undertone that troubled him. The sheer imbalance his creation introduced to warfare. Traditional tactics became suicide when facing automatic fire, yet military doctrine evolved slowly, leaving entire armies vulnerable to weapons they couldn't comprehend. Late at night in his workshop, surrounded by technical drawings and improvement designs, Maxim would sometimes pause and wonder if some problems were better left unsolved. The mechanical perfection of his creation offered no moral guidance about its application, and the genius that had unlocked automatic fire provided no wisdom about its consequences. But Maxim's greatest challenge wasn't technical, it was corporate. The Vickers company, recognizing the weapon's potential, acquired his patents and began systematic improvements. The original Maxim gun was cumbersome, requiring tripods and teams of operators. The Vickers redesign, completed in 1912, transformed it into something more elegant and terrible. A weapon that could fire for hours without jamming, reliable enough to anchor entire defensive lines. How do you live with creating something the world wasn't ready for? The timing was prophetic. As the Vickers machine gun entered production, European tensions reached a breaking point. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand triggered mobilization across the continent. Armies that had trained for swift, decisive campaigns suddenly found themselves facing weapons that made traditional tactics suicidal. Maxim watched from his London office as nations called up millions of men trained in formations that his invention had rendered obsolete. The newspapers spoke of honor and swift victory, but he understood the mathematical reality awaiting those brave soldiers. Each Vickers gun could deliver the firepower of dozens of riflemen, operated by crews who transformed ammunition into precisely timed death. The French believe they can take German positions with bayonet charges, his assistant reported, reading from intelligence briefings that somehow found their way to the Vickers factory. They're planning massive offensives based on élan vital, the power of fighting spirit. Maxim set down his pen and stared out at the London skyline. Fighting spirit doesn't stop automatic weapons. They're about to learn the hardest lesson in military history. The irony grew sharper as production reports reached his desk. German factories had licensed improved versions of his design, while British military procurement remained cautious about adopting weapons that challenged traditional doctrine. The nation that had fostered his innovation was falling behind enemies who better understood its revolutionary implications. Letters arrived from officers who had witnessed early machine gun deployments in colonial conflicts. Their descriptions carried a mix of awe and horror that Maxim recognized from his own feelings about his creation. "The sound is unlike anything in previous warfare," wrote a captain who had survived the Sudan campaigns. "Not the crack of rifles or boom of artillery, but a mechanical chattering that seems to go on forever. Men advance bravely, then simply disappear into the mathematical precision of automatic fire. Courage becomes irrelevant when faced with such systematic efficiency. By autumn 1914, the reality Maxim had foreseen began materializing on the Western Front. The Battle of the Somme became a monument to this tactical revolution. British troops advancing in formation were cut down by German machine gunners who had learned the lessons the British War Office ignored. Wave after wave of soldiers discovered that traditional tactics could not overcome the mathematical certainty of sustained automatic fire. The casualty reports that reached Maxim's office carried numbers that defied comprehension. In single days, advances measured in yards cost thousands of lives, brave men walking into carefully positioned machine guns that transformed battlefield mathematics into industrial slaughter. Each Vickers gun had become the anchor of defensive positions, its distinctive water jacket and methodical firing rhythm as familiar as artillery thunder. "They're learning," said his assistant, reviewing tactical reports that described the evolution of infantry doctrine under automatic fire pressure. Small unit tactics, trench systems, coordinated artillery preparation before advances. "They're learning the hard way," Maxim replied quietly. "Every lesson is written in casualties that could have been avoided if military thinking had evolved as quickly as military technology." The transformation he witnessed extended beyond tactics to the fundamental nature of warfare itself. The romantic cavalry charge became extinct, swept away by the mathematical precision of automatic weapons. Infantry learned to crawl, to dig, to advance in small groups using terrain and timing. The machine gun didn't just change battles, it changed the fundamental relationship between technology and human courage. Personal letters from the front reached him through unofficial channels, carrying testimony from soldiers who had faced his weapons on both sides of the conflict. "We call them the devil's typewriters," wrote a British sergeant who had survived the Somme offensive. "They type death across no man's land with mechanical precision. You hear them start their deadly rhythm and know that brave men are about to discover the limits of courage against mathematics." The irony was crushing. British soldiers died by the thousands against weapons based on British technology, manufactured in improved versions by British factories, deployed by enemies who better understood their strategic implications. The Vickers gun finally proved its worth in British hands, but only after catastrophic losses forced tactical evolution that could have happened in peacetime. Maxim lived to see his invention transform warfare from an art to an industry. Traditional military virtues remained important, but they could no longer overcome technological superiority through determination alone. The machine gun had introduced mathematical certainty to combat, reducing complex battlefield dynamics to simple equations of firepower and position. Late in 1916, walking through London streets filled with wounded soldiers and black-draped windows, Maxim encountered a young veteran whose empty sleeve testified to the new warfare's reality. "You're Maxim, aren't you?" the veteran said, recognition dawning in his eyes. "The one who built the machines that did this to me." Maxim stopped, uncertain how to respond to the direct confrontation with his creation's consequences. "I lost my arm to one of your guns," the veteran continued, his voice carrying no anger, only tired acceptance. "But it probably saved my life. Without machine guns, this war would have ended in 1915 with everyone dead. At least now we're learning to fight differently. Do you think you'd cling to what you were taught back home, or to what your own eyes see in a place like this? Comment which side you'd lean toward, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. Can genius be separated from its consequences, or does creation always carry responsibility? By 1916, the Vickers machine gun had become the backbone of British defensive positions, its distinctive water jacket and methodical firing rhythm as familiar as artillery thunder. Each gun could sustain rates of fire that would have required dozens of riflemen, operated by crews who understood they wielded industrial-scale lethality. The weapon that military bureaucrats had dismissed as impractical now anchored the survival of empires. Maxim received regular reports from the front lines, Technical assessments mixed with human observations that painted a picture of warfare transformed beyond recognition. The mechanical precision he had achieved in his workshop translated into battlefield effectiveness that redefined military reality. Water cooling systems functioned flawlessly through sustained engagements, while the automatic mechanism delivered continuous fire with mathematical reliability. The crews develop an almost personal relationship with their weapons, reported a technical observer from the Vickers company. They name them, maintain them with obsessive care, and speak of them as partners rather than tools. One sergeant told me his gun was more reliable than any human soldier. It never panicked, never hesitated, never required courage to do its job. The observation troubled Maxime more than he expected. His creation had achieved such mechanical perfection that human qualities like bravery and fear became secondary to technical proficiency. The war had become a contest between engineering capabilities rather than human virtues, with victory flowing to whichever side could more effectively transform industrial capacity into sustained firepower. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a physician working near the front lines, sent unofficial reports that reached Maxim through mutual acquaintances. Her letters described the medical reality of automatic weapons warfare with clinical precision. The wounds are different from traditional battlefield injuries, she wrote. Machine gun fire creates patterns of trauma that reflect the mechanical nature of the weapons. Multiple entry points, mathematical spacing, systematic damage that speaks to the industrial character of modern warfare. We're treating the consequences of engineering precision rather than the chaos of individual combat. Her observations reinforced Maxime's growing understanding that his invention had fundamentally altered the human experience of warfare. Traditional combat, despite its violence, maintained elements of personal encounter between individual combatants. Machine guns introduced mechanical mediation that transformed killing into an industrial process requiring technical skill rather than personal confrontation. The psychological reports proved equally disturbing. Soldiers who operated machine guns developed different relationships with violence than traditional combatants. The mechanical interface created emotional distance that allowed sustained killing while protecting operators from the psychological trauma of direct personal violence. They call it mechanical duty, wrote an army psychiatrist whose observations found their way to Maxime's files. Machine gunners perform their function with the same emotional detachment as factory workers operating manufacturing equipment. The weapon's mechanical precision creates psychological insulation from the human consequences of their actions. Yet even as reports confirmed the weapon's tactical effectiveness, stories emerged of unexpected humanity in mechanical warfare. Machine gun crews often developed informal truces with opposing positions, creating windows of quiet that allowed both sides to retrieve wounded or deliver supplies. The mechanical rhythm of automatic fire created predictable patterns that enabled calculated acts of mercy. One incident particularly struck Maxime's imagination: a British machine gun crew that deliberately fired high during German supply runs, creating the sound of engagement without causing casualties. When questioned by superiors, they claimed mechanical difficulties that explained their poor accuracy. The machine gun's reliability had become so legendary that equipment failure provided cover for human compassion. "The weapons work too well," the crew commander explained when the truth emerged. "We can kill with mathematical precision, but we're still human beings. Sometimes humanity requires mechanical failure." The story embodied the moral complexity that Maxime increasingly recognized in his creation. Perfect engineering created opportunities for human choice that traditional warfare had rarely allowed. Machine gunners could choose precision or mercy, effectiveness or restraint, mechanical duty or human compassion. Technical improvements continued throughout 1916, each refinement increasing the weapon's reliability and effectiveness. Vickers engineers, reported ammunition feed mechanisms that virtually eliminated jamming, cooling systems that functioned through extended engagements, and mounting systems that enabled rapid position changes. The mechanical evolution of automatic weapons continued to outpace tactical adaptation. "We've created something that wars can't break," his chief engineer reported during a late 1916 meeting. "The weapons function regardless of weather, terrain, ammunition supply, or operator training. They've become the one constant in otherwise chaotic combat conditions." Maxim nodded, but found himself wondering if creating unbreakable weapons for a broken world represented achievement or failure. The mathematical precision of his invention offered no guidance about its moral application, while the efficiency he had achieved amplified both human virtue and human weakness. Reports from neutral observers confirmed the weapon's transformative impact. Red Cross officials noted that machine gun warfare created distinct patterns of casualty treatment and prisoner care. The mechanical nature of automatic weapons somehow enabled more systematic humanitarian response than traditional combat allowed. As winter approached, Maxim found himself walking London streets more frequently, observing a society transformed by industrial warfare. The city's rhythm had changed to match the mechanical precision of modern combat. Factory schedules determined by ammunition demand, social interactions shaped by casualty lists, civilian life organized around supporting mathematical warfare. How long can a man carry two conflicting truths, pride in achievement and horror at its consequences, without breaking? Maxim died in 1916 as the Great War reached its bloodiest phase. He'd achieved wealth and recognition, but carried the burden of knowing his mechanical genius had made warfare more efficient and more terrible. The mind behind the weapon had sought to prove his worth through innovation, only to discover that some victories carry prices that outlast their creators. The end came quietly in his London home, surrounded by technical drawings and patent documents that chronicled a lifetime of mechanical innovation. His final weeks were marked by an obsessive return to the calculations that had produced automatic fire, as if mathematical precision could somehow resolve the moral equation his invention had created. Dr. Harrison Wells, the physician attending Maxim's final illness, later described finding him at his desk in the early morning hours, working through recoil physics equations with trembling hands. He seemed to be searching for something in those calculations, Wells recalled. Some variable that might change the outcome, some factor that could transform the mathematical certainty of his creation into something more hopeful. The secret Maxim carried through his final months emerged only after his death, hidden in a sealed letter addressed to future generations who might someday judge his contribution to human history. The letter, discovered among his private papers, revealed the full weight of moral understanding that had shadowed his later years. "I have given humanity the power to kill with mathematical precision," he wrote in the careful script of his engineering training. "Each improvement in mechanical reliability multiplies the efficiency of human destruction. I created this weapon believing that superior firepower would end conflicts quickly, reducing overall casualties through decisive advantage. I now understand that efficient killing simply enables more thorough killing." The letter continued with calculations that had haunted his final years, projections of casualty rates if machine gun warfare continued to evolve, estimates of how mechanical precision might scale human conflict beyond recognizable limits. His engineering mind had grasped implications that military leaders were only beginning to comprehend. The Vickers gun fires 450 rounds per minute with mathematical reliability. A single gun crew can deliver the sustained firepower of 50 riflemen while requiring only water for cooling and ammunition for operation. I have created an industrial process that happens to kill human beings. The moral mathematics of this achievement exceed my ability to calculate. But perhaps the most revealing passage addressed the personal cost of mechanical genius applied to human destruction. I dreamed of proving myself through innovation, of achieving recognition denied to a poor farm boy from Maine. I succeeded beyond my imagination, creating something that will reshape human conflict for generations. Yet I find myself longing for the failures that once frustrated me. Unsuccessful inventions harm no one except their creator's pride. Perfect weapons harm everyone except their creator's reputation. The letter's final section described Maxim's growing awareness that his achievement had fundamentally altered the relationship between human nature and warfare. Machine guns introduced mechanical mediation that transformed killing from personal encounter into technical operation, creating emotional distance that enabled unprecedented scale of destruction. Traditional combat required individual courage and personal confrontation. My invention enables killing without personal contact, courage without individual risk, destruction without emotional consequence for the operator. I have mechanized human violence while leaving human nature unchanged. The combination may prove more dangerous than either element alone. Elizabeth Morrison, the physician whose frontline reports had reached Maxim during his final years, attended his funeral and later wrote about the moral complexity his death represented. He died understanding both the mechanical perfection and human catastrophe of his achievement. His final weeks carried the weight of seeing his mathematical precision translated into systematic human destruction. Yet his invention also enabled the tactical evolution that eventually ended the static warfare of 1914-1916. The machine gun forced military innovation that saved as many lives as it cost. The technical legacy continued evolving even as its creator died. Vickers engineers reported breakthrough improvements in ammunition feeding, cooling efficiency, and mechanical reliability throughout 1916. Each refinement increased the weapon's battlefield effectiveness while multiplying the moral complexity of its application. "We've perfected something that Mr. Maxim himself came to question," admitted his chief engineer at a memorial gathering. "The weapons function with mathematical precision that exceeds human wisdom about their proper use. We can build perfect killing machines, but we cannot build perfect judgment about killing." Yet the most profound revelation emerged from frontline accounts that reached London shortly after Maxim's death. Machine gun crews had developed their own moral protocols for managing mechanical lethality, creating informal rules that preserved humanity within industrial warfare. Sergeant William Davies, a Vickers gun commander, described the evolution of ethical guidelines among operators who wielded unprecedented destructive power. "We learned to be human with perfect weapons," he wrote in a letter that somehow reached Maxim's family. "Mr. Maxim gave us machines that could kill without limit, but we still had to choose how much killing to accept. The mechanical precision created space for human decision that traditional combat rarely allowed. His invention forced us to become more deliberately human, not less." The observation suggested that Maxim's creation, despite its mechanical character, ultimately required human wisdom for moral application. Perfect weapons demanded imperfect operators who could choose restraint despite capability, mercy despite efficiency, humanity despite mathematical precision. In the end, the Vickers gun became more than a weapon. It became proof that individual brilliance could reshape the destiny of nations, and that the most profound innovations often emerge from the marriage of technical genius and historical necessity. What would you remember more, the mathematical precision of destruction or the deliberate choice of mercy despite capability? The war that Maxim's invention helped define finally ended in November 1918, leaving behind a world transformed by the mathematical precision of automatic weapons. The armistice celebrations that filled London's streets carried undertones of exhaustion rather than triumph. Victory achieved through industrial efficiency rather than heroic achievement. In the months following the war's end, a different kind of reckoning began. military analysts attempted to calculate the human cost of automatic weapons warfare, producing numbers that defied easy comprehension. The Vickers gun alone had fired an estimated 100 million rounds during the conflict, each round delivered with mechanical precision that traditional warfare had never achieved. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison returned to London in early 1919, carrying testimonies from soldiers who had lived through the machine gun revolution. Her reports described men struggling to articulate their experience of mechanized warfare to families who understood conflict through older paradigms of individual heroism and personal valor. They speak of feeling disconnected from their own actions, she wrote in a medical journal dedicated to war trauma. Machine gunners describe operating their weapons with the same emotional detachment as factory workers managing production equipment. The mechanical interface created psychological distance from consequences that traditional combat made unavoidable. Yet, among the testimonies Morrison collected, certain stories revealed unexpected dimensions of humanity emerging within mechanical warfare. Machine gun crews had developed elaborate protocols for preserving moral choice within technically efficient killing, creating space for human decision that previous warfare had rarely allowed. The story that most profoundly illustrated this paradox came from Corporal James Mitchell, a Vickers gun operator who had served throughout the Somme offensive. His account, preserved in Morrison's files, described how mechanical precision had ultimately enabled rather than eliminated human compassion. The gun worked perfectly every time, Mitchell recalled. 450 rounds per minute, continuous cooling, automatic loading and ejection. Mr. Maxim had created something that never failed, never hesitated, never questioned orders. But that reliability meant every shot was our choice. We couldn't blame equipment failure for killing or for mercy. Mitchell's crew had developed what they called mechanical compassion, the deliberate introduction of human error into perfect mechanical systems. They would angle barrels slightly high during certain engagements, claim cooling system problems during supply runs, or report ammunition feed difficulties when opposing forces attempted to retrieve their wounded. The weapon's reputation for reliability gave us cover for being human, Mitchell explained. If our gun fired low or stopped at convenient moments, officers assumed mechanical problems rather than moral choice. Mr. Maxim's perfect machine created the first opportunity many soldiers had to choose mercy without facing execution for disobedience. This revelation suggested that Maxim's creation, despite its mechanical character, had ultimately expanded rather than constrained moral agency in warfare. The mathematical precision of automatic weapons created predictable patterns that enabled calculated acts of humanity, while the weapon's reputation for reliability provided cover for operators who chose restraint despite capability. As the 1920s progressed, the full implications of machine gun warfare began emerging in military doctrine, international law, and social understanding of conflict. The mechanized efficiency that had characterized the Great War established templates for future conflicts while raising questions about the proper relationship between technical capability and human judgment. The Vickers gun itself continued evolving, with post-war improvements increasing its reliability and effectiveness, even as military leaders grappled with the moral implications of perfect killing machines operated by imperfect human beings. Each technical refinement multiplied both the weapon's destructive potential and the weight of choice placed on its operators. In 1924, Elizabeth Morrison published a comprehensive study of machine gun warfare's psychological impact, dedicating the work to Hiram Maxim and the soldiers who learned to remain human while operating his inhuman, efficient weapons. Her research documented how mechanical precision in warfare had forced unprecedented moral clarity on combatants who wielded power their training had never prepared them to manage. Traditional combat obscured individual responsibility within the chaos of battle, Morrison wrote. Machine guns removed that obscurity, making every death a deliberate technical choice. Operators could no longer hide behind the confusion of close combat or claim their actions were beyond conscious control. Mr. Maxim's mathematical precision forced systematic moral decision-making that previous warfare had rarely required. The final assessment came from an unexpected source. Veterans who had operated Maxim guns, returning to peaceful professions, but carrying the weight of precise memory. Unlike soldiers whose combat experience remained chaotic and fragmented, machine gunners retained mathematically clear recollections of their wartime actions. Thomas Peterson, who had commanded a Vickers gun throughout 1917 and later became a factory foreman in Manchester, described living with mechanical clarity about violence in a 1925 interview. "I remember every engagement exactly," he said. "The gun's rhythm, the ammunition count, the precise moment when we chose to fire high or low. Mr. Maxim gave us perfect memory of imperfect choices. Traditional soldiers can lose themselves in the fog of battle, but machine gunners carry mathematical records of every moral decision. The weight of this precise memory created an unexpected legacy. Veterans who had operated automatic weapons often became the most articulate advocates for preventing future conflicts, carrying first-hand understanding of mechanized warfare's efficiency that made them effective witnesses to its horror. In the end, Hiram Maxim's greatest achievement may have been forcing humanity to confront the moral implications of technical precision applied to human destruction. His mechanical genius had created weapons that demanded systematic ethical choice from their operators, transforming warfare from chaotic violence into deliberate moral decision-making. The workshop where it all began stood empty by 1925, its machinery sold to other manufacturers who continued refining the mathematical precision of automatic weapons. But the fundamental questions Maxim's invention had raised about genius and responsibility, efficiency and humanity, technical capability and moral wisdom, continued resonating through a world still learning to live with perfectly efficient instruments of imperfectly controlled destruction. If this story reminded you that even in the darkest times, small acts of humanity still matter, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story. If you came home with this story, who would you dare to tell?